The story begins on a normal morning for everyone in town, except for high school student and artist Mark, who is stuck in a time loop. He's lived through this same day so many times that he has every detail memorized. Every morning he watches his mom leave for work, then has breakfast with his father, Daniel, and his sister, Emma, effortlessly predicting everything they're going to say. He knows Emma will invite him to her soccer match, which he always declines, and that Daniel will be solving a crossword puzzle, for which Mark already knows all the answers. The rest of his day unfolds in the same predictable way. He rides his bicycle through town knowing exactly what each person will do. Sometimes he even interferes, like snatching a phone from a driver's hand to prevent an accident, but mostly he amuses himself. He buys a lottery ticket with the winning numbers or drives an excavator around town just for fun. Mark doesn't go to class anymore, but every day he stops at a particular corner to give directions to a girl named Phoebe, whom he has a crush on. Occasionally, he walks her home afterward, but she never accepts his invitation to hang out later. When he feels frustrated, Mark visits his friend Henry, who is struggling to finish a video game level. Using a hypothetical scenario, Mark asks Henry what he would do if he were in a time loop. Henry responds that he'd get the girl, because with infinite tries, he'd have to get it right eventually. He also points out that Mark should want to escape the loop, as the repetition and isolation would wear him down. Mark dismisses this, claiming he'd be king of the world. However, deep down he does have moments of loneliness, especially when he avoids an important conversation his dad wants to have with him. Mark continues his daily attempts with Phoebe at the pool, until one afternoon, something unexpected happens. Margaret steps in and catches the ball before it hits Phoebe. Shocked by this deviation from his usual routine, Mark follows her, but she gets into a car and drives away before he can talk to her. In the following loops, Mark searches for Margaret, desperate to know if someone else is stuck with him. He waits by the pool, but she doesn't return. He tries calling the number on a missing dog flyer she dropped, but it doesn't belong to her. After numerous failed attempts, Mark happens to be at a restaurant when he notices a manga volume and $100 bill carelessly left on a table. Guessing it could only be Margaret's, he rushes outside. After briefly thinking he has lost her in the crowd, he finally spots her resting against a wall. Determined but awkward, Mark asks if she's also in a time loop. Margaret confirms it. They chat about their experiences, agreeing that it feels like being the only people awake while everyone else is asleep. However, Margaret isn't interested in befriending Mark and prepares to leave. Not wanting to lose the only person who understands him, Mark convinces her to stay a little longer by showing her some funny things he's discovered around town. Like a dog stealing a man's phone, when Margaret gets an important phone call, she insists she has to leave, but Mark persuades her to share her number so they can find each other again. Before the day resets at midnight, Mark memorizes her number. Fortunately, he still remembers it when the loop starts over. Eager to keep in touch, he experiments with different hairstyles and sends her pictures. But she doesn't reply until he directly asks her to meet up. As they start spending more time together, they share bits of their lives. Mark is supposed to be in summer school but has only attended twice. He dreams of going to art school, but his parents are obsessed with him excelling in honors math. He also dreads the loop occurring on the day Daniel wants to talk about his future. Margaret, on the other hand, is an AP student who dreams of becoming an astronaut. They also exchange stories about the crazy things they've done during the loop. Margaret has attempted to beat her chess app on maximum difficulty, unsuccessfully, and has taught herself to drive by stealing her friend's car. However, her favorite thing to do is watch a bird swoop down to catch a fish in a lake outside town, so she takes Mark there to show him. He agrees that it's an incredible sight. After spending time together, Margaret drives Mark home, but once again, she receives an urgent call from a man named Jared. On the next reset, Mark takes Margaret to watch the local skaters. While most of them struggle, one manages to land an impressive trick, which he finds just as fascinating as the bird at the lake. Later, the duo rides a steamroller through the streets while Mark tries to learn more about Jared. Margaret only tells him that Jared is a med student. That evening, as they indulge in an absurd amount of fast food and ice cream, Mark reflects on the loop. He believes that most of life is junk, but within the repetition, they can find truly amazing moments. This inspires him to propose an idea. They should collect all the tiny perfect things around town. Margaret is skeptical. She doesn't want to seize the day like Mark does. She just wants to get through it. However, she eventually agrees, acknowledging that they only have each other, so they might as well make the loop meaningful. They begin leaving dollar bills in stores for strangers to find and discuss theories about the fourth dimension. Margaret argues that time isn't the fourth dimension, rather, they are the shadows of it. She even draws a 4D cube on a store window to explain her perspective. From then on, their loops are spent discovering unique moments. An elderly woman dancing after winning a card game, a man appearing to sprout wings when a van stops behind him, a janitor pausing his work to play the piano. Every now and then, Margaret drags Mark to the library to teach him math. Yet, no matter what they do, Margaret always leaves when she receives that call from Jared. One night she even admits that she doesn't want the day to end. She'd rather have time broken forever. After an evening of jokingly giving his dad absurd answers about his future and showing him a fake tattoo, Mark wakes up to a new day. Determined to find out who Jared really is, he searches online and finds a picture of Jared, a staff member at the local hospital, which makes Mark feel small and insignificant. Frustrated and unsure of what to do with his growing feelings for Margaret, Mark turns to Henry for advice. Henry suggests a stealth date, spending time together as usual but gradually making it more romantic, leading up to the perfect moment for a kiss. With lots of planning and some bribing of the art department kids, Mark sets up a surprise for Margaret in the school gym. A mock-up of Tranquility Base, the site of the Apollo 11 moon landing. They spend the afternoon playing around, pretending to be in space and eating astronaut food. Later, they ride a bicycle through the school corridors together. At Mark's house, they watch a movie and Margaret admires his artwork. She stumbles upon a map he's drawn, marking all the perfect moments they've found. Impressed, she listens as he explains how he recreates it every morning, hoping to find a pattern, but so far he hasn't. Sitting close together, having a quiet, meaningful moment, Mark tries to kiss Margaret. However, she pulls away, saying she can't. Confused, Mark presses for an explanation, suspecting it has something to do with Jared. Frustrated, Margaret finally snaps. She insists they shouldn't do anything to mess things up, and that their perfect moments should be enough. Devastated, Mark reluctantly agrees to just be friends. As always, Margaret leaves to take her phone call. The next reset, Mark wakes up in a bad mood. For the first time, he doesn't predict his family's breakfast conversations. Afterward, he walks normally to Henry's so he can share his feelings with a friendly ear. But since Henry doesn't understand what's going on, it only frustrates Mark more. When he returns home later, Mark is cornered by Daniel, who tries to have the talk about his future. Unable to take it anymore, Mark finally snaps and yells at his dad, telling him he has no future because time is broken, and that it isn't fair that he isn't allowed to go to art school when Daniel quit his job to write a midlife crisis book. Then, Mark tries to go to his room, but he's bothered by Emma's violin practice, so he goes to her room instead to ask her to stop. After putting the violin away, Emma takes the chance to ask him how the talk went, not believing what she hears when Mark replies that he hates that his dad quit to follow his dreams. But he can't do the same. Emma explains that Daniel didn't quit, he was fired. Not because he messed up, but because they just didn't need him anymore. He won't admit it because he's ashamed. Their mother is mad at Daniel for losing his job, but she won't say anything either because it would be too cruel. And Daniel doesn't actually mind the idea of Mark going to art school. It's just that they can't afford it right now. In Emma's opinion, Mark would know all this if he thought about someone other than himself for a change. Feeling bad for not paying more attention, Mark asks her about her soccer game, in which they lost 3-0. On the next reset, Mark goes to see his algebra teacher, Mr. Pepper, who doesn't remember him because he's only gone to class twice. Mark asks him what could possibly cause a time loop and shares a bunch of theories he found on the internet, ranging from wormholes to magical curses. Mr. Pepper rejects them all except for the theory of singularity, which he admits could be reasonably possible. Now Mark thinks that the only thing he needs to do to get out of the loop is to get on a plane and fly out of it. The next time he meets Margaret, they realize they've found every perfect moment in town, yet time hasn't restarted. Mark is frustrated, but she doesn't understand why. After all, they're truly free in a world of zombies. But this isn't working for Mark anymore. He wants the things he creates to last longer than a day. To distract him from these thoughts, Margaret takes him to a model home. But afterward, Mark still brings up the subject of leaving the loop. Margaret points out that adulthood is just getting stuck in a boring routine, so it isn't worth it when they can have all the time in the world. But Mark responds that they actually don't have time because time is the one thing that, when spent, you don't get back. Hearing those words makes Margaret agree to try Mark's plan. So the next morning, they get on a plane to Tokyo. However, Margaret is nervous, and when Mark starts fooling around with a sleep mask, she takes the chance to escape. When Mark realizes she's gone, it's too late. The plane is already taking off. Although he receives a text from her with an apology, he spends the flight making some art. When the time comes to cross the international date line, he braces himself to see what happens. Sadly, it doesn't work, and he wakes up once again on the same day. When he goes downstairs to have breakfast, he behaves in a much calmer way, which gets him a nicer reaction from his sister, something new. Noticing how being more polite gives him better results, he asks Daniel about his book, which leads to a friendly conversation. Afterward, Mark goes with his dad to watch Emma's soccer match, and this time they actually manage to score. Inspired, Mark decides to go through the loop in a different, more altruistic way. He gifts the winning lottery ticket to a random woman, uses the excavator to rescue a cat from a tree, dances with the elderly woman, claps for the janitor playing music, and even goes to algebra class. This time, he impresses Mr. Pepper, thanks to all the tutoring he got from Margaret. He also spends more time with Henry and Emma, and even joins the skaters to try pulling off a stair trick. But he ends up falling and breaking his wrist. At the hospital, after getting his wrist cast, Mark is surprised to see Margaret there. He decides to follow her and finally discovers what has been holding her back all this time. Her mother, Greta, is dying of cancer. The next time the day resets, Mark wakes up with tears in his eyes and runs outside to stop the car, hugging his mom before she leaves for work. Afterward, he visits Henry, and while they play video games together, he tells him everything about Margaret. Mark used to think this was a love story and that he was the hero, but in reality, this story has always been Margaret's. She just wants time to stay frozen so her mom doesn't die. Meanwhile, Margaret is visiting Greta. She admits she keeps thinking about a boy and that she messed things up. Greta reminds her that it's never too late to make things right. Later, while sitting in the spot that gives her the angel wing effect from one of the perfect moments, she sees something unexpected. The missing dog just walking through the neighborhood. Margaret rescues him but doesn't return him to his owner. Knowing he'll be lost again the next day, she realizes Mark was right. Everything they fix gets broken again. Instead, she decides to visit Henry and teach him how to beat his video game. Watching the character die over and over before finally finding the key to continue gives her an epiphany. Death is terrible, but if you don't face it, you end up losing yourself too. A map appears on the TV screen, and that gives Margaret another idea. She remembers Mark saying the perfect moments might create a pattern he couldn't find. So, she grabs a map of the town and starts marking down all the tiny perfect things to look for the pattern herself. After revisiting all the moments and studying the map for hours, she realizes something is missing. Time. Using string, she creates a three-dimensional model of the times and places of the perfect moments. The shadow it casts forms a 4D cube, but one vertex is missing. After making some calculations, she determines the final moment will happen at 7 p.m. at the pool. In the next loop, Margaret visits Greta to express her fears of losing her, but Greta reassures her, promising that she'll be fine and that Margaret can do this if she allows herself to embrace all of life's perfect moments. That evening, Margaret arrives at the pool a few minutes before 7 and finds Mark there. She tells him about the pattern, but Mark confesses he already knows about Greta, and now he doesn't want to leave the loop because he can't do that to her. Moved by his words, Margaret shares a secret. The night before the loop began, she was told Greta didn't have much time left. She wished for time to stop, and somehow something or someone out there listened and granted her wish. Then Mark showed up. She didn't understand why at first, but now she does. This way, when it's time to go, she doesn't have to go alone. Declaring this as the last perfect moment, Margaret kisses Mark. Afterward, Margaret goes to the hospital to say her final goodbye to Greta. She leaves the building hand in hand with Mark, and together they wait for the clock to strike midnight. When it suddenly starts raining, they know they've finally gotten out of the loop. The next morning, they find the missing dog and return him to his owner together. Thank you for watching. Don't forget to like and subscribe. See you on the next video.